It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. You can also find a link in the description of where to buy this wonderful book. Barbara, the author of the book, has graciously shared some copies with me, and I'm selling them in my Etsy shop, so you can find that link there. Barbara also told me something about the cover of the book that I did not know. Also, it's kind of the same picture repeated on the side and on the back, but this was an actual photo that Barbara took of her daughter, Barbara's daughter, Heather, and then Opal, and that's on the steps of Ebenezer Church. They were going into church. Opal was Heather's Sunday school teacher, and she was looking in her pocketbook to find some money, some change or something to give Heather to put in the offering plate. So isn't that amazing? I'm so glad that Barbara shared that with me, so I could share with you. Most of the older people were particular about one thing or another, usually about what they ate or drank or how they did certain things. The two things that Mrs. Myers was the most persnickety about were her clean rainwater and keeping the flies off the food that was left out. Of course, since the dogs and chickens would be right up by the house and there was no such thing as screen doors, there were always a good many flies in the house. Biscuits, bread, and some other foods were left out all day long, and they always had to be covered with a cloth. In the city, they didn't have that much of a problem with flies, and I don't think they left their food out like we did either. Like most people up here, the Myers only used water from the spring or fresh rainwater for drinking and cooking. They called it the good water. Since they lived a good way off from the closest spring, Mrs. Myers conserved her spring water and the rainwater she caught around her house. They would use water out of the branch, never the good water, for washing clothes and taking baths. It always seemed a little strange to me that Mrs. Myers thought it was all right to wash some dishes in branch water, but would never let so much as a drop of water from the branch touch her milk pail or milk crock. To her, that was just the most awful thing, but to Lucille, water was water. She had no idea of the difference or why it was so important, and Mrs. Myers never took the time to explain those things to her. She just thought that everyone should know those things no matter where they came from. My mama was very particular about water too. Our spring was close to our house, and we had plenty of good water that we used for drinking, cooking, and washing dishes. Mama wouldn't let us put the hand washing pan up on the stove by where we were washing dishes. She wouldn't let us drink water out of that branch out there either, and we couldn't use the drinking dipper to get water out of the bucket of branch water. We basically weren't allowed to let that branch water come close to the things we ate or drank out of. Of course, back then, there were 3 or 4 families that lived upstream from us, and there was no way to know if they emptied bath water or something else into the branch. A lot of times when it was hot, the animals would stand or lay in the branch to cool off, and in the fall or early winter, when we butchered the hogs, we would empty the contents of the intestines and rinse them out in the branch. Lucille did know that Mrs. Myers could get fighting mad about the flies getting on the food. So one day, seeing how the flies were all over little Eddie and his soiled diapers and not knowing any better, the poor girl dipped some of the clean rainwater into Mrs. Myers' big milk crock and rinsed out little Eddie's diapers in it. Mrs. Myers had the biggest fit over that. Of course, I wouldn't have liked it either, but I'd have just told her not to do it anymore. Well, Mrs. Myers didn't explain any of that to Lucille. She just let her have it good, up one side and then down the other. As you could guess, Lucille didn't stay around but just a little while after that happened. If they had taken the time to teach her, she would have done just fine and made Eddie a real good wife. Ben in the Army. February 14th, 1944 to March 26, 1946. When Ben was an E5 in the Army and stationed in Saipan, he would write to me, and I could tell from his letters how homesick he was for everything. He would tell me how much he missed certain foods. Like one time he said, "I'd give anything if I could have a little cup of jelly from the Fugate apple tree." Well, as soon as those apples were ready, the girls and I picked them. We had the best time making that jelly because we were making it for Ben and knew how surprised he would be to get it. I put some in an old teacup with a handle because it wouldn't break like glass, you know, and sealed it with wax. But then I had no idea of how to package it for mailing. The postmaster told me, "There are a couple of ways. It might sound a little strange, but you can pop some popcorn and use that for packing around the cup, or you can put cotton around it and be sure to write 'fragile' on the box." So Corinne, Jetty, and I made popcorn and securely packed it around the jelly. The girls added drawings and a letter saying how much fun they had helping make the jelly for him. Of course, they also enjoyed eating the popcorn. The Army wanted an American teacher to work with about a dozen of the Army's personnel's children in Saipan and offered me a job to go over there to teach for a year. Ben didn't think it was safe and didn't want me to bring Corinne over there. They would have paid me real good and paid all my travel and other expenses too. I had several other teaching opportunities during that time while Ben was gone. I was asked 2 or 3 times to teach at a boarding school. The Army also wanted someone to teach 9 Army personnel children in Arizona, but then I wondered what would happen to my school children here while I was gone and what would become of Jetty. Ben's job at the base in Saipan was to load and refuel B-29s. When he did this at night, he would have to drive the planes without lights to the area where they were refueled and then back to where they were loaded. One night, someone sabotaged one of the B-29s he had loaded, and before it got off the ground good, it crashed. Ben knew the plane was going to explode, and he screamed at his men, trying to get them to follow him. It was dark, and I guess during all that commotion, they just couldn't hear him. They were confused and ran in the wrong direction, to the side of the fence that didn't have a gate. They were climbing the fence trying to get over when the plane exploded. The explosion tore their bodies apart and left bones and flesh hanging from the fence, and the fire burned everything else up. Ben never did get over that. He had a medal and a citation that told about how brave he was to drive the planes through all kinds of terrain at night without any lights. But Ben never said anything about his citation and the good things he had done. He never talked about it, and he was never the same person again after that explosion. There's not much more to say about Ben. I was worried about him because of what he had been through, and I looked forward to when he would be coming back to us. Finally, he wrote and told me that he thought he was coming home real soon. So I got all of his clothes out and hung them up just like they were before he left. You see, when he first left for the Army, I had boxed up all his hanging clothes so they wouldn't get dirty and dusty. Well, I made sure that all his clothes looked good, and I hung them up. I wanted everything to be and look exactly like it did the day he left. I wanted him to feel like he was back home, not someplace where everything had changed. After a while, when I realized he wasn't coming home yet, I took down all his clothes and folded them up and put them back in the boxes and pushed them down the hallway where they would be out of the way. Then I heard from him again that he was coming home, and again I took all his clothes out and hung them up. And again he didn't come home. It seemed like I did that over and over, but when he finally did come home, I had everything ready for him. All his things were the same, everything looked the same, but that first night he was home, I knew deep down inside that something was wrong with Ben and that our lives would never be the same. We didn't have any window shades in the mission house, so when we went upstairs to bed, we would always get our night clothes and blow out the light before we undressed. Well, that night I put the light over by Ben's side of the bed and went to get my own, and he just up and said, "I'm not going to stay here." I thought I'd heard him wrong and asked him to repeat it. "What did you say?" "I'm going home," he said, very agitated. "This is home." "It's not either." "It is too. I bought it, and I've got it all paid for except $200. I finally convinced him that I owned the mission and that we wouldn't have to move and pay rent somewhere else. That seemed to satisfy him, and he said, "Well, I'll finish paying for it," and he laid down and went to sleep. That was the last thing he said until morning. I knew then for sure that he was not right. I slept in another bed that night to keep from waking him up because he had scared me so. I wasn't sure what he would do. I suspected that his mind was bad before he came home because of what he wrote in some of his letters. I thought he said some strange things, but I never brought it up. I didn't want to believe it. A time or two he wrote, "Yeah, I know when I come home you won't let me stay long before you'll send me to Eastern State." Eastern State is a mental institution. The next morning I got up and fixed breakfast. When it was ready, I sent Corinne and Jetty upstairs to tell him to come on down and eat. After breakfast, he wanted to go see his family. I told him I couldn't go with him because I had to teach. He told me to get someone to teach for me, so I got Anna Lee, one of the Pierce girls, to substitute for me, and we went to see his family. The whole time I prayed that he'd be okay once he was home for a while, but the damage had been done. 1947 through 1959, the last mission worker. The last interested mission worker to stay up here was Miss Loggins. She was a teacher from over there at Midway, up next to Johnson City, who was interested in mission work and wanted to learn more about it. I don't know whether it was the Presbyterians or her own church in Midway that sent her down here to stay and work with me. I really didn't care who sent her, for I considered her a gift from God. For years I had tried to get someone like Miss Loggins to come and help in the community. I was teaching regular school during the day, and then I had night school at the mission house for adults who wanted to learn how to read. On Sundays I taught Sunday school, and sometimes when the preacher didn't show up, I'd fill in for him. And then on top of all that, there was the regular mission work of helping those in the community needing assistance of some sort or other. There hadn't been a real mission worker here to help since the mission had closed. Of course, Miss Loggins didn't know anything about mission work, but she was a fast learner, always eager to help anyone she had a chance to, and willing to do anything that needed to be done. She was friendly and had an excellent singing voice. I don't know if she had been crippled in the past or whether it was a birth defect, but she walked a little odd, almost hobbled. It didn't slow her down any, though. She was a big help with the night school and was real good to watch out for Carrie. She was pleasant to be around and a likable young woman. Somewhere there's an eye watching you. It was after Thanksgiving in 1949 when we had our hog killing. Carrie, who was a little over 2 years old, had been out with his daddy and the other men all morning watching them butcher the hog and prepare the meat. Miss Loggins had been up in the woods collecting pine and cedar branches to decorate the stair banister and around the windows in her room. Well, when she was coming back to the mission house, she went by where the men were working to check on Carrie. Just as she had rounded the corner, she heard Clark just a-cussing away, so she said, "Come on, Carrie, let's go upstairs and I'll show you my Christmas tree." She just had a little tree, maybe 2 feet high. We had a big tree downstairs that went almost all the way to the ceiling. Well, when Carrie saw what a little tree she had, he put his hands on his hips, circled his way around, and then said, "I'll be GD." Only he said the whole word. Miss Loggins didn't know what in the world to say. She thought that was the funniest thing ever was, and she came downstairs just a-laughing. "What in the world are you laughing about?" I asked, and she told me what Carrie had said. And just about that time, I heard Clark outside yelling out those same words. That's exactly where he got that. He had never heard talk like that before, you know. Even I had never heard that said in the house. I wouldn't stand for that kind of talk. And to think that he would pick it up that quick. But then again, he was a smart one, and once he started talking, he was real bad about picking up and repeating everything he heard. His daddy might have said things like that when he was out and got angry or something, but not around the house. I had never heard Ben say anything like that. Of course, later, after he got sicker, that was another story. Then it was just one thing after another. I'd always told Ben, you have to be careful around even the tiny ones because you don't know how young they start to remember things. People say, oh, you can't remember that young, but you can. I remember a lot of things that happened when I was young. That's why I've always said it's very important that you watch what you do. You might think it doesn't matter what you do or say around a young child like that, but you never know when little eyes are watching or little ears are listening. Miss Loggins on being an example. Miss Loggins was a good Sunday school teacher, and everyone, especially the young people, seemed to like her, even though she was considered an outsider or a foreigner by the older folks. That was one of the reasons I wanted to come back and work with my own people so bad. I knew the ideas they had about outsiders. Having another teacher for the night school helped a lot too. The students liked the classes but didn't want to settle down for too long at a time or have reading lessons every night. So once a week on Friday night we would have special programs. Sometimes we would play games, but mostly it would be a music night, especially after Miss Loggins started leading the singing. The students would bring their guitars or we would sing along with the records. One Sunday after Sunday school, there was a crowd of young people down there at Teresa's. Most of them were sitting on the ground in front of the house watching these boys standing on the porch steps playing their guitars and singing country songs. Miss Loggins got up there on the steps and broke into melody with them. When they started playing, "If you shut up your mug, I'll fill up your jug" with that good old Mountain Dew, she just reared back and sang that song right along with them. I don't remember all the other songs they had been singing, but when she sang the song about Mountain Dew, it riled up a few people as something awful. That was it, as far as some of them were concerned, and after that, they wouldn't have anything to do with her. They acted like she had committed the awfulest sin that had ever been. I don't know what happened, whether they said something to her or not. I just don't know. But anyway, she didn't stay long after that. She left without saying anything, and she never did correspond with me either. I thought, well, how silly now. If they had let her stay, just think about what she could have been to this community. Who knows? She might still be here till yet. But Miss Loggins, singing that one country song, ended her mission work in this community. Of course, she wouldn't have done that for anything if she had known that the people would be offended and react so unfavorably. I felt right sorry for her. Later, her sister came over here once and stayed a short while, but it was no surprise when she was not accepted either. So many people don't understand when they are doing mission work that others set a higher standard for them to live by. It's not always right, and it's not always fair, but it is so. And for some people, it's easier to judge and gossip than it is to accept and forgive. Well, I guarantee there's not a perfect one among us yet. But I guess when they are so busy making a big thing out of someone else's shortcomings, they don't have time to look at their own faults. That was one reason I did a lot of things different than other people, even the people up here, because I knew they expected me to be different, you know. Some people probably think I'm a little extreme about some things, like the preacher down at Del Rio who called me that deep water Baptist. He teased me all the time about it, but I didn't care. I guarded my tongue and my actions because what I did and what I said and how I acted meant a whole lot to the people around here. I would sure rather be careful than be embarrassed by what I do or say. Since people tend to imitate or become like those they look up to as their heroes or role models, it's important that you pick someone with strong values to follow, and it is extremely important to watch very closely what kind of an example you are to others. Got a little friend there. We'll stop right there today. Another interesting part of Opal's life. At the very beginning of this one today, we hear more about Lucille, Eddie, that was Ben's brother Eddie, his wife Lucille, and how they were just so hard on her. And she'd come from the city and she didn't understand about cooking and cleaning, and obviously about water, about how they did their water, the good water and the branch water. She didn't understand any of that. It is interesting, though, how even Opal noticed that Miss Myers was like picky about, like, she washed some dishes in the branch water, but then not her milk stuff. So it's funny how us humans, how we all have those little things of how we do stuff, you know, how we think. We do it so often that we just get in the habit of thinking that's the only way to do it. And there's nothing wrong with preferring. Like, I prefer to do my kitchen a certain way, just like Miss Myers. But I hope that I would be kind enough to explain it to someone if they come and had to use my kitchen with me and they wanted to know how I did stuff. I would hope that I would be kind enough to do that. And Miss Myers, maybe it wasn't, you know, Opal said before, she was a very kind lady. She just thought that Lucille should know and should understand. So, yeah, it's difficult to imagine that, though, Lucille just being dropped into that situation where she's expected to know all those things. And especially since she had grew up in a home, remember Opal told us, where her mother had passed away, her daddy didn't remarry, she had no sisters, she just had nobody around to show her what she was supposed to do. And then there's in that little part, you can really hear the scarcity of water for some people. Of course, there's people today who still have that, especially in other countries, that water's just it's a constant battle to get water, clean water. I live, like, and Opal did too, there in the land where there's multiple springs. Like, even above my house here, there's so many spring heads that all seep out of the ground and then flow into the creek. And at one time, my family used one of them for gravity water. That's where our water come from. It was way up the creek, but technology and different ways of learning how to do stuff in between when Opal or Miss Myers had to walk a far piece to get her spring water because they were carrying it in buckets, people figured out, well, we could put a pipe up there and just let it come gravity, bring it down here and come out. So when I was growing up in Granny and Pap's house till I was in about 8th grade, that's what we had, was gravity water. So you turned on the faucet, whatever, but it was coming from way up there, way up the creek. Anyway, it's interesting to think about that, though. In those days, people, just like today, you have to build. Sometimes you move into a house, it's not by what you want it to be by. And then other times you might find a house and you're blessed that maybe you've got, like Opal's family did, they had a spring right there. So it was easy for her mama just to go right out the door and get spring water. But Miss Myers had to go so far that she had really come up with this unique way of managing that, so that she saved her rainwater. And of course she saved also the spring water. She would sparingly use it, and she called that the good water. And then the branch water that come right out of the branch that you didn't know, like Opal said, what happened above it, whether there was people contamination or animal contamination, then she used that for something else. Such a different way of life, isn't it? But of course, Lucille knew nothing about any of that, and no one took the time to explain to her. And then that's why she was focused on, well, they don't like the flies. She was probably thinking, I've never in my life seen this many flies, but they don't like the flies, so, you know, my little baby's diapers are drawing them, I better wash them out. But then she washed them out in the milk stuff. Oh my goodness, yeah. It's one of my deer alarms. Sorry about that. I forgot to go up there and turn it off. It's a miracle I made it all through the reading. Usually if I forget, I read about 3 lines and then have to quit and go turn it off. So that's really amazing that I made it all the way through the reading. But poor Lucille. Yeah, poor Lucille. And poor them too, because if they had reached out to her the way Opal tried to do and tried to explain stuff to her, she would have stayed, and sounds like she'd really been part of their family. So that was just a sad, sad situation. And then another sad situation we hear about today from Opal is Ben, how Ben in war and seeing the terrible things of war, I just can't imagine how it changed him, kind of broke his brain, made him think about stuff different, made his brain just quit working right like it was supposed to. So she says she could already tell from the letters he was writing that something just didn't sound exactly right. And then once he come home, of course, she could see it firsthand. So that's so sad. So sad anytime that happens, but you know, for me, I think, well, that's so sad because he was you know, over there trying to do stuff for the good of me. I'm so thankful for our armed services people, and so sad when you think about all the things they go through. And lots of times we think, well, they come home and it's all gone away, but lots of times it's not. Of course, some people bring injuries home with them. Some people pay the ultimate sacrifice and never get to come home. But some people, even if they don't bring a physical injury, they're like Ben, and they bring home things in their mind that they just can't get over, or that they, even if they go on to live a productive life, they deal with them for the rest of their life. So sad for Ben. And then Opal finally gets help. She needed help, didn't she? She's talking about teaching during the day, teaching at night, helping out at church, teaching Sunday school, then ministering to people in the community, doing mission work for them. We know already that she let people come stay with her at the mission. So she needed help for sure. And then she finally got somebody, Miss Loggins, and sounds like she was a real helper. But she just made the mistake of singing that song, and then everybody turned on her. And they shouldn't have. They should have, like Opal said, they should have, even if they like maybe chastised her, which I'm thinking, well, what about the boys that was singing with her? What did they do to them? Probably nothing. But if they were going to do something to her, maybe chastise her or say that's not really a nice song or something, but then I think you'd had to say it to the boys that was singing it too, and then maybe she would have stayed. That's just a sad situation there too. But it reminded me of two things. For one thing, she said, "Eyes Watching You" was the name of that little section. Let's see, what was it exactly? Somewhere there's an eye watching you. So there's an old song, there's an all-seeing eye watching you, and that's probably where Opal, why it's that titled, that little part, maybe her or Barbara, either one, come up with that. But Pap and Paul sing that song. I'll put a link in the description below so you can go hear it. Now, it's a song I grew up with, so I really like it, but I have heard people say, like, I find comfort in it. I'm comforted that there's an all-seeing eye watching me as a believer, watching me even when I'm bad, even when I do the things I'm not supposed to do, because he's watching me in love is what I believe, and wants to correct me and help me to get back to where I should be as a believer. But I'm really comforted by that song. But I've had people tell me over the years that that's just the scariest song they've ever heard. They can't stand to think about there's an all-seeing eye watching them. That's just really creepy, and they don't like it. Whereas to me, it brings great comfort. Anyway, it's interesting to think about that aspect of it, but I'll put that song in the description below. And then it also reminded me when she's talking about her, Miss Loggins, being an example, and then Opal talks about herself, that she has to guard herself, and she wants to try to do the right thing because she knows people are watching. And within all that too is I don't know who Clark is, unless I forgot. Maybe this is the first time we've heard about Clark, and he may just be somebody in the community there. But he's cussing, and then Opal and Ben's little boy, Carrie, heard him, and then so he starts picking up the language. If you've ever been around kids, you know they get to a certain age, they parrot everything you say. So I can sure see that happening, that they would say that for sure. I mean, that he would pick that up. So, and Opal says, I'm just not going to have that. I'm not going to have it, And anyway, she's talking about being an example there. But she says she'd always told Ben and all people that you have to be careful, because children will remember and they learn from you and they'll pick up. It reminded me, if you maybe in Sunday school you might remember singing, be careful little eyes what you see, be careful little ears what you hear, for there's a Father up above looking down in love. So that reminded me of that song. And then just what an example Opal was. She talks about that, about how she tries her best to be a good example and guards herself and guards her tongue and her mind and her response to things, because she knows people are watching her. And what an example she was. She don't have no way of knowing, of course, because Opal's gone from this old world and ain't worrying about it no more, but she's still serving as an example for me, for you, for anybody that reads this wonderful book. She's still serving as an example. And I would say in that community, for people that knew her, that passed down the stories of Opal to their family, certainly her own family, of course, Barbara and Barbara's family. So pretty amazing to think about. I hope you enjoyed this part of the book. Please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday.